Well, we join our correspondent in Abuja, Sophia Adengo. Now, Sophia, good afternoon. You look at the size and the makeup of this government and business delegation, and just given the recent strains on the business front, they've got a lot to talk about, don't they?
Well, absolutely, Devin. And it's interesting that you bring up the fact that the delegation is large and broad. You know, South Africa and Nigeria are known as the lions of the continent in terms of the economy. The last time President Jacob Zuma was here was in May of 2015. And in under 12 months, he is back again speaking to President Muhammad Buhari in a bid to endorse his movement or his government and, I suppose, smoothen relations between Nigeria and South Africa. When we spoke to policymakers of President Muhammad's administration, he has said that this is a move to accelerate cooperation between the two countries. The last time, there was this gravity of attention paid to Nigeria in terms of trade and political relations was with Rob Davies back in 2015, the trade minister from South Africa, speaking to President Goodluck Jonathan. So President Zuma and President Buhari are looking to reset the relationship between the two countries in terms of economies and also in political will. You know, President Muhammad Buhari would not be, unwise to reach out to South Africa, especially in the area of security cooperation. The Buhari administration has been, canvassing not only the continent but worldwide to see if they could have AU backing in terms of fighting some kind of terror organization that is expanding here in the country, but also looking at, the markets. South Africa, of course, naturally needs the 180 million people who are here in Nigeria in terms of expanding their commodities, as well as, Nigeria looking at South Africa in terms of exporting, especially minerals and oil, as it has been doing in the last few years. Devin.
Yes. It's interesting you mentioned the word reset. I mean, there certainly was a view in South Africa that relations between these two economic powers would be reset once President Muhammad Buhari was in office. I mean, this after the departure of Goodluck Jonathan. But that resetting didn't seem to gain much momentum, did it?
Well, it's been an uphill battle. If you take a look at some of the companies that are, investing heavily here in Nigeria, for example, MTN, it seemed like, business turned to politics towards the end of 2015. In October, we saw MTN confronted with the National Communications Commission, asking for almost $5 billion in a fine that turned from business to political, in a sense that the Buhari administration had to step in and broker that arrangement that, of course, still, is in the balance. And there are other smaller, I guess, less influencing companies that have been finding it increasingly difficult to do business here in Nigeria. So it's those type of conversations that President Jacob Zuma would have to have with President Muhammad Buhari in terms of opening up these, trade relations and smoothing them out. There was also back in 2015, Devin, the talk of having a free trade agreement, and where that conversation has gone, is a big question for both Nigeria and South Africa. So it is really fundamentally important to have both these leaders not only meeting in terms of a domino effect for the continent, but also going forward internally for each continent and growing its economies and also establishing the relationship and moving away from these strained relationships that we have been so accustomed to here in Nigeria.
And finally, Sophia, just moving on from that, I mean, there was this view that South African companies were particularly targeted in Nigeria, but of course, others have said it's a coincidence that these companies were caught up in the overall changes that President Buhari was undertaking as he stepped in.
Yes, absolutely, Devin. Nigeria at the moment is going through an economic crisis. A lot of economic analysts have said perhaps maybe it's an economy on its knees, not only fighting corruption internally, but also looking at the economy and seeing that President Muhammad Buhari has to steer an economy that was largely, dependent on oil revenues, which have fundamentally dried up, according to what analysts say. So, focusing on companies like South Africa coming here to do business really needs to be the focus of President Muhammad Buhari's administration, and also looking at where indeed there was a breakdown in communication, as in the case of MTN and the NCC, and also these other potential investors coming into Nigeria to make the economy so much better. So there is a dialogue there of diversification, of moving away from a prohibition list that has been put forward by President Muhammad Buhari in limiting the import of certain commodities, but making exceptions perhaps maybe when it comes to South Africa. Devin.
Sophia Adengo in Abuja, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.